My name's Michael Harris. I'm 54 years old, and this story begins at my daughter's wedding, a day that was supposed to be the proudest of my life. The church was warm and filled with faces I'd known for years, but underneath the smiles, I sensed a tension that had been building for months. My soon-to-be son-in-law always carried a certain arrogance, but I never imagined he'd dare humiliate me in front of my entire family. That night, one cruel, simple act shattered everything I thought I knew about respect, family, and love. Backhand index pointing right before I share what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The morning of the wedding felt like any other big family event, only heavier. I woke up before sunrise, the excitement keeping me from sleeping much the night before. My little girl, though she was 28 and fully grown, was getting married. I had rehearsed the walk down the aisle in my mind so many times I could almost do it blindfolded. Still, my heart pounded like a young man's. This was supposed to be the moment every father dreams about. But as I adjusted my tie in the mirror, I couldn't shake a strange weight pressing on my chest. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was the look in my daughter's eyes last night when I asked her if she was sure about this marriage. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Dad, it's fine," she said. "You'll love him when you get to know him better." I wanted to believe her. God knows I tried. By the time I arrived at the venue, a modest but beautiful church on the edge of town, the place was buzzing. Family, friends, and old neighbors filled the pews. I shook hands, hugged relatives I hadn't seen in years, and smiled until my cheeks hurt. But when I saw Ethan, my daughter's fiancé, standing with his groomsmen, that uneasy feeling returned. He was polished, confident, and just a little too charming. Something about the way he smirked when he looked at me always felt like a challenge, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The ceremony went smoothly, or so it seemed. My daughter looked radiant walking toward the altar, and for a moment, my worries faded. I gave her hand to Ethan, looked him straight in the eye, and told myself, let it go. This is her choice. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about the small moments over the past year. Ethan brushing off my advice, subtle jokes at my expense, and the way he sometimes dismissed my daughter's opinions. I chalked it up to nerves or youth. But now, with every passing second, those moments seemed sharper. Fast forward to the reception. We moved from the church to a cozy hall decorated with string lights and wildflowers. The air smelled of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and champagne. Music played softly, and laughter filled the space. It was everything my daughter wanted. Simple, heartfelt, and personal. I was seated near the head table, proud to be so close to my little girl and her new husband. Guests mingled, clinking glasses and sharing stories. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. It started small. Ethan made a toast early in the evening. He thanked everyone, cracked a few jokes, and then glanced at me. And to my new father-in-law, he said, raising his glass, "Thank you for, well, doing your best." People chuckled lightly, unsure whether it was a joke or an insult. I smiled politely, but inside, something twisted. My brother leaned over and muttered, "Bit rough, huh?" I just shrugged, unwilling to cause a scene. Dinner went on, conversations ebbed and flowed, and I decided to shake it off. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But as dessert was served, something happened that no father should ever forget. I had just stood to grab a cup of coffee from the buffet table. My daughter was chatting with her bridesmaids, her face glowing. I was content just watching her laugh. I turned to sit back down, at the seat closest to the head table. But as I lowered myself, the chair suddenly disappeared. In one swift, almost theatrical motion, it slid out from under me. My balance gave way. My body hit the hard wooden floor with a dull thud. Plates rattled, glasses tipped, and then came the laughter. For a second, I didn't move. The sting of impact shot up my back, but the pain in my chest was worse. I looked up to see Ethan holding the chair in his hand, grinning like a boy who'd pulled the cleverest prank at school. "The ground is where you belong," he said loudly, the words cutting like a knife. The room erupted. Some guests gasped. Others laughed nervously. A few teenagers even clapped. My daughter's smile vanished, her eyes wide with shock. Time slowed. I could hear my own breathing, quick and uneven. My palms pressed against the cold floor, and for a brief moment, I felt like a child being scolded. Humiliation burned through me. But more than that, I felt anger, not the wild, shouting kind, but the deep, quiet anger that settles like stone. The kind that says, "This is not over." I stood slowly, brushing off my suit, ignoring the throbbing in my shoulder. My daughter rushed to my side, but Ethan waved her off with a laugh. "It's just a joke, babe," he said, still smirking. My daughter's hands trembled on my arm. "Dad, are you okay?" she whispered. I forced a smile. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice was ice. And then, from across the table, a voice cut through the noise. "Sir, is that really you?" It was Ethan's father. He wasn't laughing. His face was pale, his eyes locked on me, as if he'd seen a ghost. The room quieted. Even Ethan's grin faltered. All eyes turned to the older man who now stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That moment, the pause, the recognition, the weight in his voice, was the turning point. I didn't know what he meant yet, but something told me this story was about to change. And as I stood there, my pride aching but intact, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was the beginning of a silent war. The sound of Ethan's father's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Sir, is that really you?" For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My ears were still ringing from the fall, my back aching. But that question hung in the air with an authority I couldn't ignore. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, enough to make forks pause midair and conversations halt mid-sentence. I straightened slowly, adjusting my suit jacket, refusing to show how shaken I was. My daughter stayed close, her hand still on my arm, her face pale with embarrassment and worry. Ethan, on the other hand, was frozen. The smirk that had seemed glued to his face all evening slipped. His eyes flicked to his father, confused and irritated. "Dad, what are you doing?" Ethan asked, his tone edged with impatience. But his father wasn't looking at him. His gaze was fixed on me, as though he were staring at someone from another lifetime. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor. The crowd parted instinctively, as if they could sense something important was about to happen. "Michael Harris," he said slowly, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "I can't believe it. After all these years." The murmurs began. My name passed through the crowd like a ripple. My own mind scrambled. How did this man know me? I searched his face, trying to place him. The features were older, heavier, but there was something in his eyes, something that stirred a faint memory. Before I could respond, Ethan scoffed. "What's going on here? Can we not make a scene? This is my wedding." That arrogance again, that tone that dripped with entitlement. It made my daughter flinch. "Ethan," his father said firmly, "sit down." It was the first time I'd heard a crack in his composure. The authority in his voice startled even me. Ethan blinked, confused. "Dad, I was just joking. He's fine. Right? Tell him you're fine, Michael." I kept my eyes on the older man. "Do I know you?" I asked, my voice steady, though my mind was racing. His expression softened, a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "You saved my life once," he said. "Back when I was younger, when I was no one. You helped me when you didn't have to." I stood still, the room shrinking around us. I searched my memory, faces, places, years gone by. Then, like a faint photograph coming into focus, it hit me. A small-town bar, a scuffle behind the counter, a younger man cornered by trouble he couldn't handle. I had stepped in years ago, before I had a family, before life got complicated. The realization tightened my chest. I had no idea that brief moment of decency would resurface here, in this hall, on this day. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some were whispering, some watching intently. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by an awkward, almost reverent silence. My daughter's eyes darted between us, confused and curious. "I remember," I said finally, nodding. "That was a long time ago." "And I never forgot," he replied, his tone carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller. "You didn't even tell me your name back then. But when you stood up just now, when you brushed yourself off with that same calmness, I knew it." Ethan bristled. "What does this have to do with anything?" "Dad, it was a joke. Can we just move on?" His father turned to him sharply, the kindness gone. "A joke? Making a grown man fall to the floor in front of his family? Humiliating your wife's father on her wedding day? That's not a joke, Ethan. That's disrespect." The room seemed to hold its breath. My daughter squeezed my arm, her eyes shining with something like pride, maybe relief. For the first time all evening, I felt the power shift. I didn't gloat, though. My instinct was still to protect my daughter's day, not to make it about me. But seeing the groom, his face tight with embarrassment, I realized this wasn't going to fade easily. "Listen," Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. I was trying to lighten the mood. "Everyone's so serious. I didn't mean anything by it." "Lighten the mood," his father repeated, his voice calm but sharp. "You think laughing at someone's pain lightens a room? Son, you have no idea what respect means." Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked around at the faces watching him, searching for support, but found none. The crowd was silent, the earlier laughter now feeling shameful. Even his groomsmen avoided his eyes. I stayed quiet, though inside, emotions churned. A mix of pride, discomfort, and something else. A strange sense of validation. For years, I had felt small in certain rooms. I had worked hard my whole life, given everything to raise my daughter, often overlooked because I wasn't flashy or wealthy. And now, in this hall, my simple act of kindness years ago was being remembered when arrogance was being exposed. The older man stepped closer to me. "I owe you a debt, Michael. I've carried that in my heart for a long time. And to see my son treat you this way." He stopped, shaking his head. "It's shameful." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "Dad, please. Can we not do this here?" But it was too late. The room had already shifted. I turned to my daughter, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You okay?" She nodded quickly, her eyes wide. "Dad, I didn't know he could be like this. I'm so sorry." I squeezed her hand. "It's not your fault." We stood there for a moment, a strange calm settling over me. The pain from the fall was nothing compared to the quiet dignity of standing tall now. Ethan's father looked at me once more, his voice steady. "You deserve better than this treatment. Today of all days." And with that, the weight in the room shifted completely. The laughter that had stung minutes before was gone, replaced by something heavier. Respect, curiosity, maybe even guilt. For the first time that day, I wasn't the man on the floor. I was the man everyone was looking at for the right reasons. And I could feel it. This moment wasn't over yet. The weight of the room lingered, thick and expectant. All eyes were on Ethan's father, his hand resting firmly on the back of a chair, his expression a mix of recognition and disbelief. His words, "You deserve better than this treatment," still hung in the air, leaving Ethan visibly rattled and the guests frozen in a strange hush. Then he turned back to me. His voice dropped, but the quietness made it even sharper. "Michael," he said again, slower this time, as if trying to taste the memory on his tongue. "It's really you." I studied his face, the years carved into his features, the silver at his temples, the eyes that looked like they had seen too much. Something familiar glimmered there, and I felt my chest tighten. The murmurs around us faded. The only sound was the faint hum of music still playing somewhere in the background, almost forgotten. "Yes," I replied cautiously, "but I don't remember your name." A sad smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Daniel Whitmore," he said, extending his hand. "You knew me before I had anything, before anyone knew who I was. You probably saved me without even realizing what it meant." The name hit me like a soft but steady wave. It carried me back to a night I hadn't thought about in years. It was the late 80s, maybe early 90s. I was 20-something, working late shifts at a roadside diner just outside Springfield. The job didn't pay much, but it kept the lights on. That night, a storm had rolled in, thunder cracking like a whip and rain hitting the windows so hard it sounded like gravel. We were about to close when a young man stumbled in, drenched and breathing hard. I remember it vividly now. A frightened face, hands shaking, eyes darting toward the parking lot. 2 other men followed him and not long after, angry, loud, and ready for trouble. I didn't know the full story, but I knew enough. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to end well for the kid. Stay in the back, I told my coworker that night. Then I stepped between the young man and the two angry strangers. I was younger, stronger then, and something in me couldn't just stand by. There was shouting, some pushing, and I ended up walking that kid out the back door, putting him in my old truck, and driving him 20 miles out of town until he felt safe. I dropped him off without asking questions. He thanked me, called me sir, even though I was barely older than him, and then disappeared into the night. And now here he was. You were that kid, I said slowly, meeting Daniel's eyes. I was lost that night, Daniel said, his voice steady but quiet enough that only those closest could hear. Broke, scared, and stupid enough to owe the wrong people money. I thought it was over for me. And you, some stranger with grease on his hands and a kind face. You stepped in like it was nothing. You didn't ask why. You didn't ask for anything in return. You just helped me. The hall was so silent now that I could hear the faint clink of a fork somewhere in the back. My daughter's fingers tightened around mine. Her face softened, as though she was seeing a version of me she had never known. You didn't owe me anything, I said quietly, feeling the years between that night and this one collapsing into a single moment. I owe you everything, Daniel replied firmly. I was nothing back then. That ride you gave me bought me time to get out, to start over. I turned my life around because someone believed enough to keep me safe for one night. Ethan shifted in his seat, his discomfort now obvious. His earlier arrogance seemed almost childish in the face of his father's words. He glanced at his bride, my daughter, who couldn't even look at him. Daniel looked at the crowd now, his voice growing louder, firmer. And now my own son humiliates the man who once saved me. On his wedding day, no less. Michael, I cannot tell you how sorry I am. I felt the attention pressing on me, but I stayed still, letting the words sink in. Inside, I was conflicted, grateful, surprised, but also strangely humbled. I had never expected anything from that night. It was just something you did because it was right. Daniel, I said, keeping my voice even. That was a long time ago. I never thought about it again. I didn't even know your name. Well, I never forgot yours, he said. The crowd stirred, some exchanging looks, some nodding quietly. There was a strange reverence in the room now, a shift from mockery to respect. Even the ones who had laughed earlier now seemed uneasy. Ethan, desperate to regain control, spoke again, but his voice lacked confidence. This is ridiculous. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It was a joke. Daniel turned sharply. A joke doesn't make a man question his worth. A joke doesn't make your wife's father hit the floor in front of strangers. You will learn today that family is built on respect, not cheap tricks. His words were heavy, but calm, and though I didn't ask for it, I could feel the vindication settling in like a slow sunrise. I leaned slightly toward Daniel. I appreciate your words, truly, but this is their day. My daughter deserves happiness, not a war. Daniel's gaze softened again. You're a better man than most, Michael, but don't think for a second that what you did for me will go unanswered. His tone was layered, not a threat, not even a promise of repayment, but something deeper. A vow, perhaps, to not let the disrespect go unchecked. My daughter's hand tightened on my arm, and for the first time that day, I saw pride in her eyes. She whispered, Dad, I had no idea. Neither did I whispered back. The moment felt suspended, every detail sharp. The glint of glasses on tables, the shifting of weight among the guests, the faint sound of a child stirring in the back. The humiliation from earlier still lingered, but it was changing, reshaping into something else. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. You may not remember every detail of that night, but I do. And from this moment on, you'll never stand alone in my presence. Not ever again. Something in the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. Daniel's hand was still on my shoulder, steady and firm, his words echoing in my mind. You'll never stand alone in my presence. Not ever again. The weight of that statement lingered, heavier than anything else that night. It was more than gratitude. It was a pledge. One that made the room shift again, the tension changing shape. But Ethan couldn't sit still. He pushed back his chair and stood, his movements sharp and defensive. "This is absurd," he said, trying to laugh but failing. "It's a wedding, not a courtroom drama. Can we please move on?" His voice trembled slightly, betraying the unease he tried to mask. My daughter stood too, her hand no longer on mine, but clenched at her side. "Move on," she said softly, her tone like a quiet storm. "Ethan, my father was humiliated in front of everyone, and you think we just move on?" The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to look. Some were whispering, others watching as though something inevitable was about to happen. Daniel turned to face his son fully, his posture tall and unyielding. "Sit down, Ethan," he said, his tone calm but unmistakably authoritative. For a second, Ethan looked like he might argue, but the weight of his father's stare kept him frozen. Slowly, reluctantly, he sat back down, the anger in his eyes giving way to something else, confusion, maybe even fear. Daniel released my shoulder and straightened, addressing the room with a composure that demanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, you'll have to forgive this interruption. Some moments cannot be ignored, no matter the occasion. Tonight, I've been reminded of a debt I could never repay, and I will not allow that debt to be overshadowed by disrespect, even if it comes from my own blood." The murmurs quieted. The room was hanging on his every word. "I made mistakes in my youth," he continued, his voice carrying the kind of weight that comes only with lived experience. "And when I needed a hand, Michael gave it to me. Tonight, my son chose mockery over gratitude, arrogance over humility. That ends here." I stood finally, because something about standing felt necessary, not to challenge, but to stop this from spiraling. "Daniel, that's enough," I said. My voice was firm but calm. I didn't step in that night expecting anything in return. What happened earlier, it's done. Let's not ruin their wedding day. But Daniel shook his head. "Michael, you're too good a man to let this slide. And frankly, it's not just about you anymore." He turned to his son again, his voice dropping but somehow becoming even sharper. "Ethan, I raised you better than this. The foundation of every family, every marriage, is respect. And tonight, you showed none, to the man whose daughter you just vowed to love and honor." The silence stretched, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Respect," he said. "You're really going to lecture me about respect? Where was your respect when you spent more time building your empire than being home? Where was it when Mom cried herself to sleep because you were always gone?" The words hung in the air like broken glass. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. His voice stayed level. "You're right," he said quietly. "I wasn't perfect. I made sacrifices I wish I could take back. But none of that excuses cruelty. None of it excuses humiliating a man for sport." My daughter stepped forward now, her voice cutting through the tension. "Ethan, I thought I knew you. Tonight, I've seen a side of you I can't ignore." The room seemed to inhale collectively. Ethan turned to her, startled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this isn't about your father or mine. This is about us. If you think it's acceptable to embarrass my father, to treat him like a joke, what does that say about how you'll treat me?" Her words were steady, but her eyes glistened. Something inside me tightened, not anger, not pride, but something in between. I wanted to step in, to protect her, but this was her moment. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. His confidence was crumbling, brick by brick. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," she interrupted. "Maybe you didn't mean it to hurt, but it did. And now you're more concerned about saving face than making things right." Daniel looked at me briefly, as if to ask permission. I gave a slight nod, though I wasn't sure why. Then he turned to the crowd and said, "Michael, you didn't ask for this, but tonight I'll do what you never did for yourself. I'll set the record straight. This family's name matters to me, and so does yours." He moved toward the head table and took the microphone. His voice, amplified now, filled the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have something to say. Tonight was meant to celebrate love and unity. But before we continue, I must acknowledge something important. Years ago, when I was nothing, this man saved me. And tonight, my son made the mistake of forgetting what gratitude and respect look like. That ends now. My family owes him not just an apology but a promise to treat him and his family with the honor they deserve. The applause started slowly, hesitantly, but it grew, soft claps turning into something stronger. My daughter's hand found mine again, and this time she held it with certainty. Ethan sat silent, his face pale. His pride was a wall collapsing brick by brick. And though the night wasn't over, something fundamental had shifted. Daniel stepped down from the stage, returning the microphone. He stood in front of me, his voice softer now. "Michael, I can't erase what happened, but I can make sure it never happens again." I met his gaze. "You don't owe me anything, Daniel." He shook his head. "Maybe not. But tonight, I intend to give you the respect you earned a long time ago." And just like that, the power in the room changed hands. The shame that once burned in my chest was gone, replaced by something I hadn't expected to feel that night. Quiet strength. The tables had truly turned. The room still buzzed with the echoes of applause, but I felt strangely calm, as though a storm had passed and left a quiet strength in its wake. My daughter's hand tightened around mine, and for a moment, the proud father in me eclipsed everything else. Yet beneath that pride, there was an undeniable truth. This night had shifted something permanent, and staying any longer might only reopen wounds. Daniel's declaration had been powerful, but I didn't need validation from anyone, not even from him. Respect, I realized, isn't something you wait for others to grant. It's something you carry yourself. And tonight, I was ready to leave with mine intact. I leaned toward my daughter and spoke softly, just for her. "We've said everything that needed saying. Let's go." She blinked, surprised. "Now, Dad, the reception." I smiled gently. "It's their night, sweetheart. We've made our point. Sometimes the best way to end a storm is to step away from it." Daniel overheard, his brow furrowing. "Michael, you don't have to leave. Please. You belong here as much as anyone." I shook my head, my tone warm but firm. "Daniel, tonight you honored me more than I expected. But this isn't my stage, and it's not where I want to fight for respect. I'd rather walk out while the applause is still echoing than stay long enough for it to fade." The words seemed to strike something in him. For a moment, his confident posture softened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're a better man than I've ever been. You know that?" I chuckled. "No, just older." The tension broke slightly, and for the first time all evening, I felt lightness creep back in. My daughter gave me an approving look, and together we moved toward the exit. But as we walked, something unexpected happened. Ethan rose from his seat. His face was pale, his pride stripped bare, but his eyes held something else now, uncertainty, even regret. "Michael," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I stopped but didn't turn fully. "Yes." He hesitated, swallowing hard. I was wrong. I shouldn't have." I raised a hand, cutting him off gently. "Ethan, tonight isn't about apologies. It's about lessons. Learn from this, not for me, but for her." I nodded toward my daughter. "And for yourself. That's enough." His mouth opened as if to say more, but he stayed silent. I could see the weight of unspoken words in his posture, and maybe that was better. Sometimes silence says more than speeches ever could. As we reached the wide glass doors, I caught sight of our reflection, an older man, a poised young woman, walking side by side. Something about that image struck me. We weren't walking out as guests who'd been slighted. We were walking out as people who had nothing left to prove. Outside, the night air wrapped around us, cool and fragrant with the faint scent of roses from the garden. It was almost startling, how peaceful it felt after the thick tension of the banquet hall. My daughter inhaled deeply and let out a long breath. "Dad," she said softly, "you didn't have to defend yourself like that. You could have stayed quiet." I looked at her, my chest tightening with quiet pride. "And teach you what? That silence is the price of dignity." "No, sweetheart. Sometimes dignity is about speaking up. Sometimes it's about stepping away. Tonight we did both." She smiled, and in her smile, I saw gratitude, and something deeper, perhaps a shift in how she saw me. We reached the car, the driver opening the door for us, but I didn't get in right away. Instead, I turned back, the building's warm lights spilling into the darkness behind us. From this distance, the laughter and music were muffled, just another evening unfolding for those inside. I realized then that dignity isn't always in the victory. Often, it's in the quiet decision to leave on your own terms. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded, but just before getting in, she paused. "Dad, I think Ethan understood something tonight. Maybe this was the first step for him too." "Maybe," I agreed. "But whether he changes or not, that's his journey. Ours is done here." The drive back was quiet but not heavy. The city lights blurred past, and for the first time that day, my mind was clear. I thought about Daniel's words, Ethan's expression, my daughter's strength. Life had a way of throwing the past into the present, forcing you to face old wounds in the most unexpected places. But tonight, those wounds didn't feel raw anymore. They felt healed. About halfway home, my daughter reached for my hand. "You know," she said, "you were amazing tonight. I'll never forget it." I squeezed her hand gently. "I hope you don't. Not because I want to be remembered for it, but because one day, when life tests you, I want you to remember you're allowed to stand tall, and then walk away when you've said enough." She leaned back, quiet, thoughtful. The rest of the night passed without drama, and yet, it lingered in my mind like the final notes of a song that stays with you long after it ends. We didn't win or lose. We simply chose a path that felt right. And in that choice, I found something I didn't expect, peace. When the car pulled up to my house, I looked at the familiar driveway, the porch light glowing softly. Everything seemed smaller than it had a few hours ago, and maybe that was the point. The world inside that banquet hall was full of power plays and unspoken debts. But here, in this quiet, there was only what mattered. I stepped out, feeling lighter, the air cooler now against my face. My daughter followed, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. She slipped her arm through mine as we walked to the door. "Walking out with dignity," I said softly, almost to myself. "Not a bad way to end the night." She glanced at me, smiling. "Not bad at all, Dad." And with that, we stepped inside, not defeated, not triumphant, just whole.